Continue our coverage to our reporter, Anthony DiLorenzo, who has been in the courtroom. Anthony, can you set the scene for us there?
Yeah, I just actually stepped out here with John today, and we can tell you that it was so tense inside of that courtroom. The former president sat, for the most part, for what seemed like eternity there, waiting for those jurors to come in, and he was just sitting back with his arms crossed. And you can imagine the weight of the world was on his shoulders at that point. Then finally, after about us hearing word of the verdict being read at around 4:20, that's when the judge told us it would be around 5 o'clock when the jury would be brought in to read the charges and whether or not he would be found guilty or not. We all stood up. The president stood up, and as the verdict was read, he looked at each one of the jurors as they were reading this verdict.
Did he have a scowl? Did he look like sad? I mean, how would you characterize it?
There was never any sort of expression on his face. He just looked like he knew the gravity of this and it was hitting him. And one of the most key moments that I saw was that Eric Trump was the only family member inside of this courtroom to hear that his father was found guilty on all 34 counts. No other family members. Can you imagine that? This is a man who really prides himself on family, and he's really only had his sons in here. His daughter Tiffany was here one day. Melania never showed up to court. That speaks volumes, I think. So as they were about to leave the court, Eric put his hand out. They shook hands, and you could tell they were like, all right, we got to buckle up. This is going to be a roller coaster ride, because sentencing is now set for July 11th, and that certainly will deliver a big blow. Whether or not this will be house arrest, prison time, each one of these counts,
probation, some combination of the three.
Each one of these counts carries a possibility of 4 years behind bars. So whether or not that happens obviously remains to be seen.
Do you think that Judge Marchant might want to give him some symbolic time behind bars, even if it's something as simple as 2 weeks, to make a point?
He's said in the past that he never wanted to put Donald Trump behind bars because he was flirting with contempt a few times, and he said he knows that this is likely the next Republican presidential nominee. And he didn't want to do that because he knew what kind of impact that would ultimately have. So you really have to wonder, he has really been following the letter of the law through this whole entire thing. Lots of legal analysts will tell you that. However, there are some on the Republican side, including Donald Trump, will say he's been completely unbiased. One thing that really stood out for me was the fact that he let the defense at one point have an upside. That was because one of their witnesses was speaking out, and he was sort of objecting on his own, and this was Costello. He was objecting on his own. He was making comments under his breath.
Yes, of course.
The judge cleared the courtroom of the media so we would not see the bad look that this was going to be for the defense's witness. So he gave them that. He cleared us out. That was unusual, but that was a win for them.
Tell me, I know you had to bust it out here and come talk to us as soon as you could. How did it end? Where did did the jury leave first? Did Donald Trump leave first? Did they go? What door did they walk through? Did they walk down a long hall towards the elevators?
Yeah, this is interesting too. So they were excused first. The judge told them, you can speak out about this if you want, or you can keep all this to yourself. It's up to you now. He let them go, thanked them for their service. And as they walked out, you have to walk this far away from former President Trump. They all kept their heads down as they walked past him. He stared straight ahead, but there was definitely no eye contact made. There was one juror that they thought maybe they had because of during voir dire, the jury selection process. He had answered some things about how he follows Truth Social, he follows Michael Cohen, he knows some of Donald Trump's quotes from his books. I think they had their hat hung on juror number 2. However, of course, this was unanimous.
We'll certainly find out in the days and weeks and hours to come, but do you get the feeling that there was any real sticking point that this jury had? They deliberated for what, about 12 hours? Do you feel like it was ever dicey about maybe a hung jury or mistrial that somebody was digging in?
Well, I think that the defense really was going for that hung jury. I think they thought they had something there. But clearly there were some holdouts. Otherwise, we would have had a unanimous verdict yesterday right away. So there was some things that they probably had to do some convincing on. But ultimately, when they went through, there are 34 counts, and you just hear guilty, 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 guilty.
Staggering to hear that.
34 times. A former president of the United States guilty on 34 counts. The weight in that room was just so heavy. All the oxygen just sucked right out.
I can imagine. 34. It just goes on. It seems like eternity to hear 34 counts guilty. They say the way these charges were really laid out, each one built off the other, they intertwined, complicated, that it was either going to be 34 dominoes that go one way or 34 that go the other way. And
you
in this
could also
case,
have
they
some.
went.
You could also have some of the charges. He could have been found guilty on some and
Could have
not
been.
others.
Could have, but it went in a way where, right, if you're guilty of one, the rest of that house of cards fell.
It certainly did, and it was tough to tell because the monitors, we sit behind the former president, so you can't see his face unless we're watching the return monitors that they have in the courtroom. And when the verdict was being read, they turned those off, so we weren't exactly to see the exact look on his face and the weight of it all. But from other reports, from reporters who were sitting kind of on perpendicular to him, they could kind of see, and yes, he was looking at the jurors. And
you know what? Let me ask you about the jurors. These are real New Yorkers. They're just like us. At least two of the jurors I know live in Harlem. One lives on the Upper East Side. One lives on the Upper West Side. Chelsea, Hell's Kitchen, a lawyer, somebody who works in IT, e-commerce. This is a jury of all our peers. When you looked at them, what did you see? Were they tight-lipped? Were they focused? How would you characterize them?
They were super serious about what they were doing. And I think that's one reason why they didn't hang. Because they knew that they had a job to do. They needed to come in and convict or acquit. And they weren't going to leave after spending 4 to 5 weeks inside this courtroom listening to this testimony and not do the job that they were asked to do. Hung jury is really unusual to have, so you could tell that they were really serious about the task, and clearly they knew what was stacked against them because they have the former president, they have protesters, the witnesses who were called here. The witnesses who were called here, some of them feared for their lives. Stormy Daniels, she wore a bulletproof vest because you have some people on the right who could threaten, retaliate against. So that is why the anonymity is important here for these jurors.
Do you know how they will exit the courthouse tonight?
With the court officers. They are getting Secret Service level protection pretty much from these court officers. They escort them in and out every single day. We won't see them unless they want to be seen.
That's right.
Of course, there will be some reporters trying to go after some of these jurors. We know a little bit about them, but we don't know their names. It's unclear if the list will be made public at this point, though. But you said they live in Manhattan. They are professionals, teachers, 2 lawyers, IT, software engineers, a teacher. I mean, they're just like every one of us, and they call it a jury of your peers, but when it's Donald Trump...
Hard to find a peer for Donald Trump. Yeah, exactly. We have to pay the bills, so to speak. Let's talk about sentencing. July, what is the exact date?
So July 11th at 10 a.m. The defense had asked for a July sentencing because he has other criminal cases that they have to tend to as well, and they have a hearing in Florida that they need to be at, so they have to prepare for that. So he asked for a little bit of a delayed sentencing, but it's still within the sentencing window, according to prosecutors, so they consented to that July date. So he will be back here on July 11th at 10 o'clock in the morning. Again, each one of these 34 counts carries the possibility of 4 years in state prison.
Right, he could get into the hundreds of years, probably would only get into the maximum of 4, and it could wind up being 0.
Yeah, you'll do, if he were to sentence him to multiple counts behind bars, likely those would run concurrent and not consecutive. So meaning all of those years would be served together instead of one after another 34 times.
Just a remarkable day, a historic day, a day decided by New Yorkers, something that this country has never experienced before. A president being convicted of a crime, and New York jury, 7 men, 5 women, made that decision.
Right from the outset, he didn't think he was going to get a fair trial here in Manhattan.
He said that classic thing in the hallway about Mother Teresa couldn't beat these charges.
Right. We know the makeup of jurors and voters in Manhattan. Highly Democrat voters.
Highly.
But, I mean, you could have had one ringer in there who was a Republican and really favors the former president, and they could have been the holdout.
And defense and prosecution get to interview those jurors. They get to say no. It's the process of picking them was painstaking.
Yes.
So that's true.